Happy New Year! Pew! It's that time of year for the birth of new habits and better, more beautiful versions of yourself. So today we have neuroscience coach and ex-pill popping, cocaine sniffing alcoholic George Haymaker here to teach us the nuts, bolts, hammers, and chainsaws of addiction and recovery. New year, new brain, new you. This is episode 150 with George Haymaker. You're a neuroscience coach helping people rewire their brains, but that's not who you always were. There's this 64-year-long story that led up to this. But maybe let's first zoom in on age 52.
Yeah. Hi, Michael. Nice to meet you and to be here. And hello, everyone that's listening. So 52 was probably the most pivotal year of my life. At that point, I was hitting bottom from a 50 pain pill a day, 2 bottle of vodka addiction habit. Needless to say, that didn't happen overnight. So a lot led me to that place. But, when you're 52 hitting that hard of a bottom, and I assure you that bottom was hard, you're kind of just stunned and I was wondering how my life had ever gotten to that point. And so, there was a lot of self-reflection, a lot of digging deep, a lot of letting down any pretenses that I had had to that point and being willing to consider all new ideas and suggestions. And, I really was wondering whether I wanted to live or not. And so, I had to then summon some wherewithal from deep within and decide I wanted to give it another try. But I had lived one way my entire life, and now I was going to have to live a whole new way. And I just didn't know what that looked like. I didn't know if it was possible. I didn't even know the first step to go about doing it. I had never even understood my brain or even thought that or knew how it worked or even knew that it was possible to change. So I just was kind of lost at that point.
Let's zoom back past to your childhood, which sort of led to all of this. Of course, there's genetics involved. Why do people become addicted to drugs, alcohol, opioids, cocaine, whatever? There's that element, but there's also like a big trauma element, childhood element, all of your past experiences, your memories. So it seems like there's certain ages. It could have been the entire childhood. I don't know. But whatever you want to get into that can help us explain why do some people become addicted? Why do they end up with 2 bottles of vodka on their floor at 52 years old?
Yeah, there was more than 2 on the floor, but
Oh.
uh, I always try to keep 2 full ones on the floor. It's usually people that become addicted have one or both of those preconditions, meaning they have a genetic predisposition, which I certainly did. And all that means is that, you have bloodlines, genetic predisposition, that your genealogy has those markers in it, but they don't necessarily express. So that doesn't mean you're automatically going to become an addict if you have people in your family that were addicts. It just makes you more likely, especially if life circumstances cause you to express those genes, things like trauma, stress, and I went through that. So my genes certainly did express, as I found out later on. Secondly, the other typical half of the equation is that you experience adverse childhood experiences, or ACE. And that is when you're obviously growing up in an environment that it's either traumatic or makes you uncomfortable. And so then you end up at some point needing to cope with the patterns that have developed from those early childhood experiences. You need to cope with them in some way. And you suddenly find alcohol and or drugs does that for you. You find that that's a solution. And so once you find that it works and it's a solution and you continue to go down that road, you are building a pattern of coping that way. And so when you put those two together, it makes for a really potent recipe for addiction. And that's what happened to me. Is I I grew up really uncomfortable in my own skin. I was, brought up in a family where my dad was high performer, and we moved like every year during my entire childhood as he got promoted. And so I was constantly in and out of schools, like saying goodbye to these friends, meeting new ones. And I just got like really uncomfortable with it after a while, never having any stability. And when you're a child, like you have very basic, we all have basic psychological needs, but they're super important to you as a child as you're developing. And one of those is stability and having really solid foundations and knowing that things are safe and you're protected. And moving from city to city every year is not an environment that makes you feel stable. Additionally, I was highly disciplined. So as I was getting more and more uncomfortable, I started acting out more and more, and I would get disciplined as a result. So therefore, I didn't have a real solid, loving connection with my parents. It was more around, trying to making sure I behaved in order to not get punished. And some of the physical discipline got to be fairly severe. And then I went through some sexual abuse as a child for some older boys, and then I went away to prep school in ninth grade. My parents moved to Australia. So here I was in the US, kind of fending for myself, going to a private boys' school, didn't have any girls. So I got even more uncomfortable around girls. So, you're getting the idea, right? So I get to college and, the first night, there's guys partying across the hall, there's girls everywhere. And I'm like, holy mackerel, what just happened? And, they're serving whiskey. And, I end up drinking so much whiskey. First time I had ever really drank. I threw up everywhere. And I thought it was the greatest thing ever because all my insecurity went away. And so, suddenly that triggered everything. And so on and off for the next 30 some years, that is how I coped with unhelpful mental experiences because unless you do something to intervene with those anxieties that were developed as a child that you're carrying now into adulthood, unless you do something to realize that they're not helpful and intervene in them, you're carrying them with you. And then I just continued on with that pattern of coping with substances because it worked. So I was highly functional in business, fairly successful, all the way until my later 40s when the addiction started to progress, get a hold of me, take control. It became compulsive, no longer impulsive, and it had its grips on me, and I was done. And so then I just didn't stop until I was trying to kill myself, and I just simply couldn't like function without it. And it just got so bad that I finally acquiesced and went into rehab. So hopefully that kind of paints the picture as to how I ended up there.
Yeah, because if someone first just sees, you know, a 52-year-old guy with I don't know how many empty bottles of vodka on the floor, taking 50 pills, it's easy to judge this guy and say, there's something's wrong with this guy. This is a bad guy. Why are you friends with him, etc. But then if you zoom back into the childhood and you see this kid was just alone, he had no friends, and then he was probably getting bullied because he's a new kid. And on top of that, in fifth grade, he's I don't know, walking down the street or whatever, and then these boys attack him and do God knows what. And then he goes to university and he discovers, oh, alcohol numbs the pain. And then, oh, what? Well, there's girls. I can get girls. Oh, I can have friends. Oh, I can make a new me. Oh, I don't have to be that kid anymore. Oh, of course you love it. Who wouldn't love that?
Yeah, the other component I want to emphasize is what comes along with and here's a little neuroscience fun fact, is when you have a predisposition to addiction, it typically means your dopamine systems don't function properly, which means you don't get the same pleasures, same amount of pleasure from normal life activities as normal people do. So you have a dysfunctioning reward system. And so if you're walking around in life where you're not motivated and you're uncomfortable because of these unhelpful mental patterns, you know, you're looking for relief any way you can find it. And so that's why a lot of people that have these genetic predispositions, they don't really experience normal dopamine, feel good chemicals for normal life pleasures like having sex or, now don't get me wrong, it's not like you're dead flat, but, just normal things that people would experience motivation over, you may not get the same level of response from dopamine as other people do. So that's part of the issue is that then once you find and drugs and alcohol, just to give people an idea of like how this works addiction wise, normal life pleasures, when you get out of bed every day, you have a baseline homeostatic level of dopamine of around 50. Let's say 0 is 0 and 50 is enough to get you out of bed. It's the unit of measurement, I think, is it's called animals, ANAMOLES. And that's enough like to get you out of bed and, enter the day. Now, when you have a normal life pleasure, like a great meal or sex or fall in love and those types of things, you get these rises of dopamine, social engagement, or you do well and achieve something. You might drift or spike up to 100 to 150. Okay. That kind of is where normal life pleasure would top out. If you're a smoker, you get dopamine at 200 animals. If you're a cocaine user, it's going to be 500. If you're a drinker, 300. If you're a meth user, 1,000. So if you can get 2 to 10 times more dopamine pleasure from a substance than you can get from a normal life pleasure, and you're in need of finding dopamine to find relief, and you don't experience dopamine as other people do, and you can get these spikes from outside external sources that are even higher than you would ever get from a life pleasure. Like the brain's pretty attracted to that, right? And so that's what causes this attraction in the first place. And then this ongoing desire to continue to use because it's apparent to you that this is the only way you can find motivation and pleasure.
That's interesting because another lens of looking at dopamine through is this perception that you're about to get one of your needs met, that you're going to get this reward because you're getting one of your needs met. So I wonder why certain people, say with these genetic predispositions or childhood trauma, etc., don't get that dopamine. You could say that maybe it's hard for them to perceive that any of their needs are going to be met because maybe from the past, again, I'm hypothesizing and it's a bit of a loaded question, but what is the connection between our needs and dopamine?
Well, when our needs are met, we should get dopamine, right? And so, really, our entire lives are in service of meeting these six core psychological needs: autonomy, equality, significance, stability, skillfulness, and togetherness. And so all of us have those six core psychological needs. We just have them in different levels. Each one of us is different. And so autonomy might be more important to me than you. And, so they all kind of move around. So everybody's mapping looks a little different in that way. And then over a lifetime, they can evolve and change. Like as you move later in life, certain needs can become more important to you than others. So yeah, we get dopamine in response to that. But if your dopamine system doesn't function normally, then as those needs are, being met, you may not experience the same level of satisfaction as other people might. But also, if you're not getting your needs met, through trauma or other types of adverse experiences, to get your needs met or to feel dopamine, you need to find it somewhere. And if you're not getting your needs met, then you're even more likely to try to pursue it from external sources.
Yeah, and the drugs will reliably do this for whoever it seems, and certain drugs do it better than others. But then again, you've gone into the neuroscience of dopamine. There's that positive side of it where we do feel really good, but then there's a crash. There's a dark side. So maybe you can talk about that side of dopamine, and then how that high leads to there.
Yeah. So what happens is, our brain is not designed for that much dopamine that you get from drugs and alcohol, chronic use. And so it's like taking a fire hose to some new plants that you just planted. And instead of like, spraying a little water on them with a normal garden hose, you're pounding these plants with the volume of water you could get from a fire hose. That's like running that level of dopamine through your brain. So your neurons, where this dopamine travels, are not suited for that amount of dopamine flow. And so just as a plant would, begin to fail if you're hitting it with that much water, your neurons begin to malfunction as a result of that much dopamine. And so they begin to shut down and react and change, and the receptors on them begin to, like I said, shut down. And so we need to start doing more and more of the drug in order for the same amount of feeling you were getting from the original amount. And that's what tolerance is. That's why over time, we have to keep doing more and more of something to get the same feeling. You hear people say they're always chasing that first buzz because right away the neurons start to shut down from the buzz. And so you're chasing that same feeling over and over again. After a while, you're just doing a lot to feel what you now consider normal, because that baseline dopamine level that you need to feel normal has moved up from 50 all the way up to the level where your drug is taking you. And so what happens is when you stop doing the drug, it crashes. Your dopamine crashes from that higher baseline all the way down to basically zero. And that is a withdrawal. So when your dopamine crashes from this high level to nothing, and you feel like crap or have a hangover, that's what's happened, is you experience withdrawal. And so then, as painful as that is, and the more that you use, the more painful it gets, you will do anything to use more drugs in order to get back to just feeling normal. And so that's what the cycle looks like. You get trapped in it because there's just this repetitive cycle of trying to chase something that's never going to be there. And then what was once a high is now normal. And so you're just trying to chase normal, and it just is endless. And then everything else begins to shut down, from the drugs and alcohol, your entire body.
Yeah, and we're not here to highlight the positive aspects of drugs like alcohol, but that is part of the experience. So I wonder if in your early 20s, when the first couple of years or however many years, there might have been a period of things getting better, not just from the drug itself, but maybe your social life changed, economics, etc. I don't know, relationships. Again, we don't want to be like, okay, this is the key into a better life, but what was that first stage of it like? Were there some positive elements to it?
Yeah, I was fearless with women. So where I would be insecure without it, I could be way more secure with it. My inhibitions would drop, my pain would be numbed, and I was suddenly braver. And so I could talk to girls, and then once I realized that I could have some level of success at that, that also then that addiction of being with a woman and that dopamine piled on top of the drug. So you're stacking the dopamine and allowed for an even higher high. And it was like I could never find a high enough high. It's like I kept chasing and chasing and chasing. But to your point, for a while, it served me in the sense that, my social life improved dramatically, although I never really had normal relationships with women. It was more around using them to just feel good about myself, feeling worthy. So they were just I couldn't feel with them because I had shut down my feelings from childhood because I didn't want to get hurt. Because as I was moving from place to place, I just didn't want to feel anymore. So I shut all my feelings down. So here I am in relationships with women, and I was having quote unquote relationships. The sex was great, but I couldn't feel for anybody. And so, yeah, it did have some positive effects in that way, but eventually the negative began to outweigh any positives.
When did the real downward spiral begin? Looking into your story, there was a big change in your 40s. It looks like you had some kind of surgery or something and were prescribed the opioids, and then you started mixing them together with the alcohol. There was cocaine earlier on in the story. I don't know what happened in your 30s. Something definitely happened in your 40s, and it kind of hit rock bottom at age 52. But maybe we could talk about that side of things.
Yeah. In my 20s, I was a binger mostly with alcohol. I did a lot of cocaine in college, mostly just alcohol in my 20s. In my 30s, I was pretty healthy. I still binge, but I had periods of health. The 30s were a good decade for me. Then in my 40s, I ran into cocaine again. Had a really bad experience with it in my early 40s, had some surgeries, found opioids, mixed them with alcohol, enjoyed that buzz a lot better because it was more calming and relaxing than the cocaine buzz, which was, very intense and fraught with, like kind of fear. And so I gravitated towards mixing alcohol with opioids. And, then I was off and running. The relaxation I would get from the opioids and the alcohol really calmed me down and allowed me to calm my nervous system and just kind of enjoy life more. And so that I chased that for a few years, and then that's when things started to spiral. And what it really is, it's kind of like the sponge just gets filled with water and it can't take anymore. And you just get to a point where you're doing so much, going back to the analogy I just described about how you have to keep taking more and more because tolerance is building up. Your brain is shutting down. The neural receptors are shutting down. You're not getting normal life dopamine from normal life pleasures because that stopped working. And so you are now just getting any kind of satisfaction only with drugs, but the high starts to go away and you're just trying to chase normal, and you have to keep doing more and more until you're doing so much that your body starts to just shut down everywhere else. 2 bottles of vodka a day does wonders for your liver. The Vicodin is really hard on your kidneys. So now you're starting to get organ malfunction, and it just, the party's over.
Well, how did you get out of that deeper and deeper grave you were digging for yourself, and how do you help others now?
Well, that's the hard part is, when is it enough for every individual person? And only the person can answer that for themselves. And I, had people around me, my wife and others, that first of all, the addict knows that they're having a problem, right? They know deep down that there's a problem, but you are so in it that you can't extricate yourself out of it. It has such a grip on you. You can see the writing on the wall. By that point, I had already had 3 DUIs, plenty of close calls otherwise. Amazing I didn't kill someone. So there needs to be some point, and for me, it was the consequences had to be super high in order for me to just have no other options. It's almost like a mouse in a maze who had turned left and right, working its way through the maze of addiction, always trying to figure out what other way they could still use and conduct life. And then finally, the mouse gets to the very end of the maze, and there's no more left or right turns. There's only a room with a mirror in it. And that's what it was like for me. I had to just sit there and look in a mirror and say, the gig's up. You know what's up, and there's no other way. It's either die or give up. And I finally acquiesced, capitulated, and said, "Enough's enough. I can't do this anymore." And so at that point, you have to summon up enough courage and strength somehow to ask for help. And that's what I did. I went into rehab, started the slow, painful process of coming out of it, withdrawing, and then rebuilding one's life. So I went into AA, and really at that point, you just have to keep your mouth shut and open your mind and your ears and listen to any and everybody that's walked the path before you and take suggestions on how to get through this. Because your way of thinking and the way that I had conducted my life and my way of thinking had led me to a bad place. So certainly I didn't have any good ideas. And so I needed to listen to other people. And so that's what started it. And then I've always been very inquisitive. I need to know why, how, where things work in order to be willing to accept them. And so I started to read. And because AA doesn't give you a lot of information about why things work, it just tells you to do this. But really, there's an underpinning in the brain that things are changing neurologically in your brain. That's how recovery works. And so the brain is nothing more than 85 billion neurons that pattern themselves after your thinking, feeling, and acting. That's it. And so everybody has their own brain pattern of these neurons that have moved around and patterned themselves in response to your past experiences. And everybody's patterns look different because they've all had different past experiences. The beautiful thing about the brain is that it's willing to change. That is the gift of neuroplasticity. So the brain doesn't tell us how life works or how it's going to go. We have the right and ability to tell it. The problem is, once we've been down a certain path long enough, like I had been, training the brain to be a certain way, the brain is a prediction machine where it will begin to predict that you need to do this next because this is how you've always been. And all it wants to do is just keep you in survival. And so if you've given it patterns based on, certain experiences that you've had, it will continue to predict those until you intervene and change them. And so that's what anybody who wants to change has to do, is they have to embrace neuroplasticity, this idea that the brain will shift around, these neurons will break free and form new patterns. You can be anything you want to be, but you have to train the brain to do so. You have to give it new past experiences to begin to predict. And so that's what recovery is. It's this long process of saying, okay, well, that old life doesn't serve me anymore. I'm going to find a new way of being, and it's going to look like this. And this is how I have to think, feel, and act in order to be successful in that. And you're retraining your motivation system, your reward network, to appreciate normal life pleasures again. And you start to change the pattern of your brain. That's exactly how it works. But it requires you to lead the way for the brain, and the brain will follow. But you have to decide, enough is enough. This is the identity I want to live towards. This is my preferred identity. Build that life and start to think, feel, and act like it. It's very much like an actor getting a new script or getting cast in a new movie. They get the script and they have to learn how to be that new character. That's what you're doing in recovery, is you're learning how to be a new character. And then you just have to practice the hell out of it. The brain works on repetition, significance, motivation, meaning. So when you care about this place that you're going and this new identity that you're developing, the brain's especially interested in what's meaningful to you. And so it'll tag it with neurochemicals saying that this is important to this guy. I have to remember, these patterns because he's told me with his emotional investment in it and how he feels about being this new way. He's marked for me that this is significant. So it starts to really hone in on these patterns of how you want to be. And so that's what it is. It's this process of moving from to in transformation by laying out this new life you want to live and being really fastidious and committed to being it and staying in it. And if an old pattern comes up that you don't like, you have to recognize, well, that's just my old patterns resurfacing. And then you intervene in it and say, well, this is not how I want to be. You remind yourself of who you want to be, and you get back on the path. And so that's really what recovery is, neuroscientifically.
Yeah, and that's a part of your work that really gets me excited. Is yes, the neuroscience of addiction. That's important and that's interesting. But you can read books from Anna Lembke or Lisa Feldman Barrett and these different people, and get some of that. Just read the neuroscience, psychology, etc. But what really excites me about your work is this connection between identity and addiction. What is the identity of someone when they are addicted, and how do we get out of that? You're talking about how we can reconstruct a whole new identity, and that might be a gateway out, yeah, out of addiction, but also out of the maybe the life we don't want. But we can literally, like a movie director, write this script and write this character and just fake it till you make it kind of way. Almost, we can become this character. Sounds like a hard process, and some people might say it's impossible to totally change. But there's this hope and belief in your work that no, you can become whatever character you want to be, and that's super exciting to anybody. So you don't have to be that addicted guy or whatever, loser, poor guy, etc. You can do more.
Yeah. So identities, like everything else in the mind, are constructed. You mentioned Lisa Feldman Barrett, and she's somebody I follow and whose work I work from. And she has researched and detailed how all mental life is constructed. So there's no, you know, preordained or caverns in the brain where all this stuff is stored and fixed. What happens is the brain at every moment in time is ahead of our life by a few milliseconds. And so you encounter something, and what the brain does is it scans the environment, and first of all, your brain's primary job is to keep you safe and in survival. It doesn't care if you're happy or rich or have a big house. So your brain's primary job from thousands and thousands of years ago is to keep you in survival. Okay. So it's scanning the environment, looking for threat or safety to determine, are you going to live? So all your senses are bringing in that data. And then it goes to your body through interoception and gets readings from your body as to how you're feeling internally. And then it takes all this information from every situation you encounter every day, all day, and compares it to past experiences, what you've been through before in like experiences. So over time, and then what it does is it brings that the past experiences that most resemble what's happening in this moment, and it presents it to you in a simulation and says, here's how I think, brain, that you should think, feel, and act in this moment because it's how you've done it in the past. And so that's how patterns get reinforced because the brain keeps predicting things. It emerges into our mind. We engage in it because it came there. And so we strengthen these patterns over and over again. But we don't have to. So things can come into our mind, but they're just predictions by the brain. And if we look at them as such and decide that they're no longer helpful, then we can intervene and stop in them. We don't have to engage in that thought, that feeling, that action. We can learn to pause. And that was one of the first things I was ever taught in recovery is the gift of pause. Does it need to be said? Does it need to be said by me? And does it need to be said right now? If you can't answer yes to all three of those questions, just pause. And so, really, you know, frankly, we should be pausing at every moment of every day because we never have to do anything. But that's the point, and how change is facilitated is the brain's predicting things. But if we want to change, we can intervene at every moment and say, that's not how I want to be anymore. I want to be this way. And what we do is we create a prediction error, meaning that what the brain just predicted is no longer what we want to be, which means the brain's wrong. It's an error. And so then we can introduce new patterns, new ways of being to the brain that say, no, we're going to change that. We're going to move this way. And so really what that is, what identity is, it's identity is also constructed in the moment. So if you were down and out like me, yeah, you would build up an identity through all those years of being a certain way, acting, believing, thinking, feeling in those ways. But identity can change and be reconstructed just like any other mental part of mental life. And so what you need to do when you want to change is you want to sit down and draw up this new character of how you do want to be. And so how that's done is you do some work around your values, belief systems, not from the past, but from how you want them to be going forward. And a lot of them you always had, they're just hidden away and you weren't acting in alignment with them, which is why you were so uncomfortable anyway. But if you can bring those forward again and say, this is who I really want to be for the rest of my life. I want to be honest and ethical and have integrity and be hardworking and all the create a list of values, create belief systems. This is how I believe about myself. This is who I believe I can be. List your traits, your strengths, your weaknesses, really craft this characterization of who you want to be. Okay. And then that's your model. That's your target. And so then you say, okay, come hell or high water for the rest of my life, this is who I'm going to be. Okay. And then then day in and day out, you design everything you think, feel, and act has to be in alignment of that identity target. Okay. And it is work at the beginning because you are basically introducing a whole new way of being to your brain. And your brain is like, what the F? I don't know what to do with this. I don't know. And remember, the brain's job is to keep you in survival and safe. And in the process, it also wants to conserve resources. Your brain weighs 2 pounds, but it consumes 20% of your energy. So it is an energy hog. And so it's always trying to conserve resources. So when you present a new identity to it that it doesn't know, it's never been there, it doesn't know if it's safe, it doesn't know if it can keep you alive in it. You've just taken it through hell with this other identity. It doesn't trust you very much. And it doesn't know how many resources it's going to take to get to where we want to go. So it's resistant. That is why, that what I just said is why people resist change is because their brain is telling them, I don't know if it's safe, I don't know if it's rewarding, and I don't know how many resources it's going to take. So people can change. The change is scientifically possible in their brain, but the only reason they don't change is because they don't want to, or they don't want to convince their brain, stay with it long enough to show their brain that this new way of being is better than the old way. It's more rewarding, it's safe, and it doesn't require as many resources as the brain thought. So that's what this looks like is, and when I work with people, it's sitting down and saying, okay, this old identity didn't really serve you very well, did it? So let's draw up a new one based on your values, your belief systems, your traits, your strengths, your weaknesses. Okay, let's draw this up in writing, like we journal this stuff. And so now we have a firm idea and picture of who we want to be. And now we have to think, feel, and act like it every day. And so we really set up daily structures that are in alignment with keeping who we're being with who we want to be, right? And so if you do that often enough every day, and you start to picture and feel the reward of being it, so the brain can get attracted to this idea. The brain wants meaning and reward, wants to feel good. That's why it chases drugs and alcohol, because it likes feeling good. So if you can stay with it long enough through repetition, remember the brain works on repetition like the body does. It's very similar to weightlifting. So every time that you are a certain way in support, in reinforcement of this new identity, those neurons that have now formed, very loosely at the beginning, they get stronger. So more transmitters run through them, which strengthens the connections. So they get stronger like muscles get bigger. Okay. And so if we can stay with it long enough and stay motivated and celebrate small wins and rewards every single day while we're doing it, the brain begins to shift and transform. And these old patterns that we're not doing anymore begin to weaken. Because if you're not running neurochemical through them to reinforce and support them, it's like not watering and fertilizing a plant. Eventually, a plant weakens and dies and keels over. Eventually, those old neural patterns will weaken because there's no strengthening current running through them, and they begin to drift apart. The brain loves efficiency, so if neural pathways aren't being used anymore, it will weaken them and break them apart and use them for something else because it wants efficiency. It'll prune them. It'll know when you're not using something, when it's no longer relevant in your life. And so that's how you can move away from old patterns into new ones, but you have to stay locked in.
Can you give us an example of this? The easiest one would probably be from your own life, but it might be from one of your clients of, you had this old plant that you stopped watering, this old character that you stopped feeding, and then you redesigned this new plant or a person and you started watering that one. And there was like a process involved in that that led you to where you are or someone else.
Yeah. I worked with a guy who, you know, had different early life experiences, but they were uncomfortable. And so, he was really unsure of himself and needing to prove himself, similar to to how I was. But, and then he would use drugs and alcohol to cope with the symptoms. But what had happened was is we began to educate him, and he was very much attuned to very introspective and very curious, which is really helpful in this process, by the way. And so we started to educate him about the brain. And so the dots started to connect for him. And what happens is when you start to understand that you're not broken, that all you are is you've just established some brain patterns that aren't helpful anymore, and that you can change them, a lot of relief starts to set in. And so that's exactly what happened is we drew a caricature of who we wanted to be. We went through these exercises of building his new identity. And then he began to practice that. And it's not overnight, but it's steady. It is a steady transformation. And certainly he had 2 steps forward and 1 step back where he would slip and fall. And, he was trying to get over vaping. And I told him not to worry about it, because we were trying to transform a lot of other things as well. And so that was like the thing that was going to come second. And so ultimately he created this new identity that didn't involve vaping. And so he was ultimately, once he had put enough road under his treads and gotten far enough down the road with the other unhelpful patterns he was trying to transform, such as how he felt about himself. He began to live in the identity that he had created for himself, began to feel all sorts of new motivation and pride around actually being who he wanted to be. He had accomplished so much that he found that the nicotine, the vaping just no longer served him. And he wasn't uncomfortable anymore. So he didn't need the relief from that the vaping was giving him, because the underlying unhelpful mental patterns that he was coping with the vaping no longer existed. And so he just didn't need to vape anymore. And it made quitting a lot easier. And so I, worked with him for 3 months. And that's generally around the time where you can get, if you're committed and stay in it, and we work together consistently, you can get some significant transformation to where you can self guide and direct yourself at the end of this process. It becomes a lifestyle. You get so far down the road that you forget how you used to be, and your brain has left those patterns behind, and it doesn't predict them anymore. They don't come up in your mind. So, I mean, every now and again they will if you get hyper stressed. Those are like deep seated patterns that the brain can't access again out of default. That gets kind of deep into the neuroscience. But by and large, while we're doing this, we're also conditioning and regulating the nervous system so that we're much more in control of that, which is a big deal of how thoughts and emotions and behaviors are formed also, because the a nervous system out of running amok and out of control can skew how your brain predicts your mental life. So all of this is kind of puzzle pieces that fit together. But yeah, so it's just a really nice training around how the brain functions, and then using that knowledge to actually make real life changes in how you experience life and who you're becoming. And it's just transformational. I don't know what else to say. And it has so captured my imagination, and having lived through it and seen other people benefit from it, I've just decided to, dedicate the rest of my life to it, because, what's more important than that, right? Helping people experience a better version of themselves.
So it sounds like education and knowledge is a core part of the process, especially the early part of the process. It was for you, but it is for a lot of people. So I wonder, what about the people who just aren't curious? They aren't willing to, or they're too lazy to challenge the assumptions about reality and identity, and to study. That might be a different kind of way of doing it. Have you worked with some people who just don't want to learn, but they're not curious about it?
Yeah. So that person who you just described and I aren't going to work out, and it's not going to last long, because they're not going to benefit, and I'm going to get frustrated, and it's just not going to be a match made. I'm here to help people, but anyone will tell you that's been through addiction and recovery that the person themselves is the one that has to want to change. You can't can lead the horse to water, but you can't make him drink. Okay, that's just I I can't emphasize that enough. And again, this education, and done in the right way. So it's not like grinding through science where you just get glazed over and overwhelmed. It's giving it to people in ways that are digestible and understandable, and only deep enough to where they get the point, to where they can then use it to understand why they are the way they are and how it is that they're going to change. So if I just tell you, hey, go do this, but I don't tell you why, you're not going to be as invested in it. But if I take the time to explain to you why we're going to do it, and the good that's going to come out of it, and how you're going to benefit, and how this is going to meet your needs, etc., doesn't it sound like you're going to be more invested in the latter? So, that's why kids, when you're driving around in a car, they're always saying, "Why, mommy? Why, mommy? Why, mommy?" Because they want to know why. So it's fulfilling psychological needs we have for skillfulness, for autonomy, because we want to know why, so that we can be autonomous, like we can manage our own lives. So there's a bunch of needs that it's filling. So the education that I provide is in tune with what they're going through and what they're going to need to be enlightened and be able to then make what they're going through understandable to them, give them relief, give them a level of comfort that, okay, there's a scientific basis for what I'm experiencing. It's not just me being all effed up, and other people experience this as well. And it's just an enormous amount of relief that comes over you when you begin to understand why. And then also the change that's involved, the science behind why it works and how it works. And so then they begin to then self monitor themselves. And as things begin to happen that aren't right or that they don't like or unhelpful, they now know why scientifically, and they can make adjustments on the fly. It's just very empowering.
Entrepreneurship and building businesses has also been a big part of your life for whatever reason. How has that part of your life changed as your substance use and identity have changed?
So I got into being an entrepreneur because I wanted to prove myself. I had this high need because I grew up feeling not worthy to be worthy and prove myself. And so I just didn't want to, I wanted to create my own destiny. And so I just had this calling in me to do my own thing. And so the problem with it early on was it's stressful. And so now you take a stressful lifestyle and throw that on top of some unhelpful mental patterns from childhood that I had carried with me into adulthood that revealed themselves in ways like getting angry, getting defensive, hypersensitive. And so now I've got gasoline to put on fire. And so I am burning it at both ends, right? I mean, I'm highly activated, nervous system, stressed, not a good relationship with stress, and now coping with substances. And then you get that chemical infusion from substances, which only exacerbates the nervous system. And so, not a good recipe. So, I was an entrepreneur all the way up until I hit bottom, and then for a little bit afterwards. And I don't really look at what I'm doing now as entrepreneurialism. I mean, I know it kind of is, but it's not really building, it doesn't strike me in the same way that those other businesses do. It's more of a passion project, something from my heart. Like I don't have anybody else working for me. It's just me and the client. So it doesn't feel the same. So it was difficult for a while trying to manage addiction on top of everything that being an entrepreneur requires, trying to hold a business together, because those are 24/7. And so I was just running it hard at both ends, coping with everything, when I would get too activated with, drugs and alcohol.
It's interesting, and it might just be a hypothesis, but there could be this connection between this hard drive towards creating businesses, entrepreneurship, and this kind of addictive personality, someone who possibly had a bad childhood. And then maybe once you get over all that and things are okay, the serotonin comes in and you're like, I don't need that. My life is good. Let's just do something more simple. But then again, it is nice to create things and to work hard. But so think of that might be one of the weird benefits of trauma or addiction. Maybe you can just go wild and hard at things like building businesses, but I guess burn yourself out. Again, this a little weird idea or theory, but I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah. I mean, you become addicted to the adrenaline that it takes to run a business. And I just could never get enough buzz from anything, right? I was just always seeking some sort of chemical sensation to make me feel good, whatever that involved. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think all entrepreneurs are addicts. All addicts are not entrepreneurs. But, when you put the two together, as I experienced and expressed, I think they can feed on each other for sure.
And there were these sort of double-edged dopamine swords that you were using early on, alcohol and cocaine and stuff like that, which you've got rid of. Those are too sharp, I guess. And I'm sure you've discovered other tools that are a little smoother. The dopamine rises, you get what you need, but it's actually fulfilling one of your needs, or it's giving just enough. What are some of these other tools that could be nutritional, behavioral, technological, whatever tools or behaviors and things that you've discovered that you do use and that seem to be helping you and others?
A lot of what I do now is in brain performance. I certainly will help addicts transform their wiring, but a lot of what I do is for more of the general public, where it's understanding how their brain works so they can achieve peak performance. And so the way I describe recovery is it's an endless pursuit of being a better version of yourself. Now, you notice that in that description, there's no word addiction in it. And so, really, everyone can be in recovery because, you know, somebody that's pursuing the endless, on an endless path that'll never be ever achieved to be the better version of themselves, that you could say that about a lot of people, or, people that are into self growth and development and, personal development. They just always want to see how they can be better. And so that's really what I am on, is that path. And then I always espouse a brain first approach because, again, the brain is 2 pounds. It consumes 20% of our energy. But how many of us think about, ask, what does the brain need? Or do we just assume that the brain's going to be there for us and respond no matter what? Sounds pretty unfair to me when the brain is the number one determinant over our success, our happiness, our fulfillment. It runs every system in our body. Nothing else works without it. That we don't spend an inordinate amount of time caring about what it needs in order, if nothing else, than just to make sure it gives us what we want, right? So we'll go to the gym and work out many hours so we can look good, our bodies can look good. But do we spend anywhere near that amount of time worrying about how the brain works, how it functions, how it feels, um, and the brain is just as trainable as our body is. It responds just as well to training. The answer is no, from what I've found out. And so, what I really espouse is this brain first approach that if we structure every day with our brain and mind first, serving the brain, then it stands to reason that we will get everything we want out of it and more. So there is this broad spectrum of performance that the brain can achieve. And most people have no idea because all they've ever experienced is where they're at in that moment. Because they don't train it, they don't give it the sustenance, the type of exercise, the sleep, the recovery, the mindfulness, everything else that the brain would love to have, they don't give it to it. And so they don't know what great performance could look like. So they're just kind of stuck where they are. So my whole thing is brain first approach, serve your brain, and that starts with the moment you wake up to the moment you go to sleep. There are intentional things you can do with diet, nutrition, morning rituals, nervous system conditioning and regulation, sleep prep. Did I say exercise?
Yeah, like I guess all these things are out there anyway. But the basic point is like, okay, let's think about the brain and how we can help our brain. But you might have certain foods or certain exercises and things that you think work. But I guess it's sort of becoming common sense these days anyway. So you can get into it if you like, but otherwise, people can fill in the blank probably.
It is common sense, but the only difference is that do you know exactly why you're doing what, the effect that it has on the brain, and are you doing it for the brain or are you doing it for some other reason? So everybody knows to eat healthy, but do you know what to eat to serve your brain? Do you know when to eat to serve your brain? Do you know how much to eat to serve your brain? Do you know what vitamins and minerals the brain needs in order to function? The answer is no, that's not a brain first approach. So that is the difference of what I try to espouse is all of this stuff has a reason for the brain. Let's lead with the brain, the rest will take care of itself.
Well, if one was to want to learn about this brain stuff, this brain first approach, were there some books or people or sources that helped you? And I always find it hard to recall the exact titles and names of people and all that. But what pops into your head right now?
Well, all of my neuroscience training comes from Ramon David out of Australia. He leads the Brain First Institute, and he espouses the neuroscience research and teachings of Lisa Feldman Barrett. But, as far as a lot of the other stuff, the brain first approach and all the nutrition. I get it from all over the place. I've taken numerous nutrition courses from Stanford. That's where I get a lot of my nutrition information. And a lot of it I've, kind of just developed on my own as well through trial and error and working with this over time.
Yeah, just awareness of, putting something in your body and then, being aware of, "Oh, how did this make me feel?" And, "Oh, this is working, this is not working."
But you can understand the underlying science as well as to how it's going to make you feel. And then you can validate it with your own feelings.
Yeah.
So there's science out there everywhere that'll tell you, you know, I need to eat protein with fat, with complex carbohydrate all at the same time so it affects my digestion a certain way. So the nutrients and glucose and amino acids that my brain needs emit into the bloodstream slowly so it doesn't cause a massive insulin spike, so I don't crash. I mean, there's just underlying science behind all of this stuff that's really helpful to know so that when you're crafting your meals, that stuff is running through your brain saying, I need to eat this way because it's going to affect my brain this way, but then it's going to also affect how I live the experience the rest of today. I'm going to feel better. I'm going to have more energy. My thoughts are going to be quicker and clearer because I'm eating this way. That is exactly the direct correlation that I want people to make from the actions that they take at every moment of every day because they know the effect it's going to have on them an hour down the road, half an hour, 2 hours. Like they are ahead of the game, feeding their body and acting in certain ways, exercising in certain ways at certain times because they know the effect that it's going to have on their brain and therefore in their life.
Yeah. Start with the research, the studies, everything's already been done, and then I guess you can continue the, experiment on yourself, and it'll probably work because it's been, replicated again and again, but maybe it doesn't, but I guess start with the science. That seems to be the smartest approach rather than just throwing random things at the system. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Your shirt says, it's a cool shirt you got wearing there. It says "I bleed." It says "I bleed" something, but yeah, what does that shirt mean to you? What do you like about that shirt?
Well, it says bleed orange and black. So I'm a Giants fan, San Francisco Giants fan. I live in the Bay Area, but yeah, I got it from a blood donation place because I donate blood as part of my lifestyle because I like to help others. And so, again, when we're crafting new identities, one great thing to include in that is to help others at every chance that you get without expecting anything in return. At least it's important for my identity. And so I have to live these experiences in order for me to feel good. When I feel good, I get feel good neurochemicals. That's dopamine over for natural life pleasures so that I don't need to feel the need to use again. And so that's what crafting a new lifestyle in service of a new identity looks like.
Yeah, and for those people who want to change and are ready to change and learn, you are helping those people as well through your neuroscience coaching and education services. If people want to talk to you or learn more about that, where do you recommend they go?
Go to my website, georgehaymaker.com, Haymaker. They can go to LinkedIn or YouTube and find me. Yeah, so I do one-on-one coaching, and I also have a brain club, which is a community of people that want to come in and learn together and share the experience of transformation together.
All right, well, thank you so much, George, for sharing your wild but happy ending story. I guess it's not over yet, but we're in the middle of it, and I'm glad I can join in for for an hour of it. And thank you again. It gets me motivated to learn more about the brain and neuroscience. I mean, obviously, that's what I'm doing. I got this podcast. That's why I'm talking to people like you. It's a process of learning, but it's also just very nice to hear this very human story that seems to be having a happier ending. So thank you for that.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on for the opportunity. Nice to meet you, Michael.